right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Live from the Tracking Room. This is episode 5. I'm going to start out saying I just been trying to start this episode for about 20 minutes, but damn buzzing fly running around my apartment. I've been trying to kill flies for the last 20 minutes, so I'm finally ready to settle in. I'm done with the fucking fly business. Enough of that. Let's see, how we starting this time? Oh yeah, last time. So we got the new music segments going on, right? Last episode we did Snake Chaney's Chester Copperpot was the intro and outro for the episode. If you never heard of Snake Chaney, they're a band I've been working with for a while. They're really great guys. They're doing a lot of stuff in the Nashville and Murfreesboro communities. And that song I really like. It's one of my favorites off their. They did a LP that I mixed. I recorded, mixed, mastered the whole deal. It came out a couple years back, but that was one of my favorite tracks off the record, Chester Copperpot. I thought that'd be a good one. So that was the song from episode 4. This one I'm going to try to predict. I think I'm doing High Dive, another Okemo song. You already would have heard it by now. But yeah, man, another Okemo. I talked about him on the podcast before. My buddy Chris Jed, great dude, great musician. He makes great songs. So yeah, check out Okemo, check out Snake Chaney. That's the music this time. What else, man? What we got going on? Let's see. I made some notes for the show this time. Man, it is, today is October 10th. It is day 10 of Sober October. I'm still hanging in there, man. I'm still living the sober life. But day 10 happens to fall on October 10th, which is Mental Health Awareness Day. Mental health, that's a lot of things people like to talk about. A lot of people like to be progressive nowadays, you know, which is a great thing. Being progressive is always moving forward. But, yeah, man, mental health, a lot of people talk about it. I feel like the whole point of Mental Health Awareness Day is to reduce the stigma of mental health, right, of depression, admitting that shit. And I totally get that, man. I'm not somebody that's, you know, absent depression, absent my own mental health. See, I don't like saying that I got mental health issues. You know, I feel like there are definitely people out there that do, and I feel like that's a disservice to them to say that I do. But I definitely, you know, especially going through this Sober October, you know. Sober October, the whole point for me really is I'm trying to take the power back a little bit, you know. I'm trying to exercise my willpower a little bit, trying to prove to myself that I control my life, you know, that I can take control, that I can make decisions, and I don't have to rely on anything. I don't have to use any crutches, anything like that, you know. See, I'm going to adjust my mic a little bit here. But yeah, man, I'm going through this Sober October stuff. Something I'm realizing is I deal with more anxiety and depression than I would like to admit. I know that's the truth, because something you don't realize maybe until you start to be a little honest with yourself and you remove some of the crutches out of your life that you normally stand on. I'm finding myself dealing with emotions that I didn't know I had, you know, that maybe I've been hiding from. I know in one of the podcasts I talked about that I've been smoking weed for a really long time, probably since I was like 17 years old, more or less every day. And yeah, man, I'm dealing with all those emotions, and I'm kind of enjoying it, you know. I don't know what it's going to be like when I can go back to smoking again, but I kind of like the habit, the workflow I'm getting into, because now my answer is working hard. My new answer for feeling uncomfortable, feeling anxious is I gotta work. I gotta do something. You know, I go to the gym. I'm working on the podcast. I'm doing stuff like that. So Mental Health Awareness Day. Anybody listening out there, man, I'm on your side. You know, it's a tough thing to deal with, depression. But my answers for it are simple, man. Hard work, and really just bearing it. Sometimes, at least the level that I deal with it, I think it's just sometimes it'll guide you. So sometimes it's not always bad, that depression. You know, if you deal with some clinical depression or something like that, I can totally understand what you're going through, that it's not fun, that it ain't easy. But one thing I do that I would say is try to be realistic with yourself, and try to be maybe try to take it on, you know, like a challenge. So that's one thing I've been thinking about today. I know a lot of people talking about Mental Health Awareness Day. And on that note, man, I don't want to get too deep in the podcast too early on, but something also that popped up in the past couple days. My cousin Chris, he passed away when I was 13 years old on Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving. And to be honest with you, man, he died of a heroin overdose, my cousin Chris. And he was an adult, and he's 26 years old, when he passed away, and that was 10 years ago this Thanksgiving, and it was his birthday this last week. So I was thinking about him, and it's not something I think about very much. It's somebody I forget at the time. He was a hero of mine. He's somebody I really looked up to as a person. He was my whole family. I got a big family, and we all live close to each other. A lot of my family actually lived on the same road, just a couple miles apart growing up. But Chris and his brother Sean and their sister Amber, they grew up in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia. That's where they went to school. That's where they lived, and I went and visited them once when I was young because their sister Amber was graduating high school. And I know I always looked up to Chris and Sean. Sean skateboarded, and Chris rode BMX. He rode bikes all the time and stuff. And I remember he showed me a bunch of tricks he could do on his bike, and I thought he was the most badass dude I'd ever met in my life. He listened to this band called the Grateful Dead, which I wouldn't learn about for a couple more years. And I'm not a huge Grateful Dead fan, but they definitely have some tunes that I like listening to. But he wore like cool rock t-shirts, and they wore skateboard gear and skate shoes, and Chris was a badass, man. And I loved him. I really did. And something I really regret, it's not really a regret, I guess, but something I wish is that maybe I would have got the chance to know him as an adult, like as me being an adult, It would have been cool, man, to see what it's like on Mental Health Awareness Day, talking about a guy that was, he was probably burying his emotion in the use of drugs or something. I don't think he was a big heroin user, but I do know that he did it, and it might have been in the first couple times, or maybe even the first time, but unfortunately he lost his life to a heroin use, and it's a shame, man. It's a real shame, because he was the nicest guy in the world. He had a great attitude. He always cutting up. I like to, I want to be a comedian and make jokes. I like to cut up, and he was funny. He was very funny. I guess when I was 13, he was 26, so he was, about 13 years older than me. And I loved him to death, man. I loved him, and I know my family, we all loved him. We were all close to him, and again, I don't want to get too deep on this podcast, but 10 years now, the boy's been gone, and I miss him all the time. I don't think about it very much, but it also makes me think, I still got a cousin. I still got my cousin Sean. I still got Amber. I still got, I got 13 cousins, including Chris. And I guess that includes myself and my brother and sister, too. My granddad's got 13 grandchildren. So, yeah, man. If you got family out there, and this is not to get too deep into this either, but drug use is something my family, I've seen in my family, I've seen around me. And if you got anybody in your life today that is going through something hard like that, or has been through addiction, has got mental health issues, man, just reach out to them. I know we're all getting older, we're all being adults, but reach out, let them know you love them, let them know you're thinking about them, because a lot of the time, all you need to get through that stuff is just a little support. You need a little something to break up the perspective a little bit, to let somebody know that you're thinking about them, and they wouldn't have known otherwise that you were thinking about him. Reach out and show him your love, because I know Chris, if Chris was here today, I'd do anything I could to reach out to him, let him know how I felt, let him know that we love him, and that we miss him, and Chris, I'm not a huge, I don't know if I'm a huge believer in an afterlife or anything like that, but I do feel like somehow maybe I can still connect to him one day. Maybe I can still connect to him now, connect to him through his memory, So, yeah, man, that's that. If you got family out there, if you know somebody, friends, anybody, just reach out to them, let them know you love them, because we're not all here forever. We all got a time limit, expiration date, and it's gonna hit you one day. So, whatever. Let's start off with some death in podcast number 5. You know what I'm saying? But what else, man? Yeah, that's that little portion I wanted to get out of the way. And man, and on that, we had a huge weekend of fights, and a lot of fight announcements since UFC 229. And something I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna try to keep the fight talk on the end of the podcast. I'm not gonna try to get into it too early on, because I know a lot of people aren't huge fight fans, and I'll do all the other stuff, and then we'll get to the fight stuff. So that is coming a little later in the episode. We'll get to a bunch of fights, the recap 229, and the plethora of new fights and the new main events on UFC cards coming in the future. But something else I was thinking about this week, man, on the note of connecting to other people is I just wish you could be honest with everybody in your life. A lot of the time as an adult, a lot of the people you know in your life are workplace people, people you know from work, people you know through some kind of profession or networking and stuff like that. You don't often make the same kind of friends you would have made in school. When you make friends young in life, I feel, and you keep them till later in life, I feel like those are the kind of people you can really show yourself to emotionally. You can really be honest with them, and you don't have to be afraid of any kind of repercussion for letting them know what you might really think. Something I was thinking about this week, man, this is a question, right? A question that I wish I could just pose to people in my life sometimes, So if you knew that this was the last time that I'd ever have a conversation with you, right? Let's see, I'm talking to you right now. If this was the last time you knew we'd talk, is there anything that you feel like was left unsaid? I wish I was thinking about living my life in that manner, really. Lately, I don't like leaving things unsaid, and I don't like moving on to another day and another moment without saying how I really feel to people. And sometimes in life, that's just that feels stigmatized. Talking about mental health and stigmatized something, you can't always tell people how you feel. And I don't know if I'm doing a good job of getting this out the right way, because I'm trying to read my notes while I'm saying it. And I don't mean to say that in any kind of depression sense either. Like, if I was gone tomorrow, what would you, I'm just saying, but what if we lived life in any moment, we weren't afraid to tell somebody something that we really felt, something that you're really holding on to, and you're in a conversation with a person, and there's something you think about them or a certain way you feel towards them, and you wish you could just, let them know. You could just say it. But we can't always do that, And so something I wish I could, to people close to me, a question I wish I could ask them, if there was anything today that you wanted to say that you left unsaid until tomorrow, and you didn't get to say it. Say that you didn't get another chance. What if you found out the next day I moved to another city, got a new cell phone number, you just weren't ever going to be able to talk to me again, Or not just me, anybody. What would it be that you would want to say? Would it be, that you really felt about them, that you had a great friendship, and maybe you're not embracing the terms of your friendship, the terms of your relationship as much as you could. And that could be with anybody. You're not embracing the relationship with all the people around you. And I know that's some super deep shit, and maybe that's not something to get into on the podcast, but it's something I've been thinking about all week, is you have so many relationships with people, and if you're not alone, you got some kind of relationship with somebody, a workplace relationship, a friendship, an intimate relationship. And I feel like that maybe there's people all over the world all the time that just leave things unsaid. And I've been trying to think about maybe living my life in a way that I don't leave things unsaid anymore. That to rid myself of the fear and the stigma of people knowing how I really feel about them. And not in a negative sense either, just more like a positive thing, that you let people know you love them, you let people know you think about them, you care about them, and how that could maybe enrich your life, how that can change your perspective, enrich a relationship between you and somebody else. But yeah, man, I don't know what brings that up. Actually, I do know what brings that up, but I'm not going to get into it on the podcast. I just sometimes wish I could be closer to people. Because I know I got it in me to be there for people, to be close to people, and I oftentimes will project you guys like this thing, but it's really me. I'm really talking about me. I feel like I could be closer to people. I feel like I could have a better relationship with people. And back to the Sober October thing, this isn't stuff I normally think about. When you quit smoking weed and you don't have all this stuff to run into and break up your day, sometimes you're left with maybe what you really want in life, instead of these other addictions, these other things you do to give yourself some kind of feeling. Maybe the new drug is relationships. The new drug is being close to others and enriching your life through that, and trying to make yourself happy, make other people happy, and have better, close personal relationships. Because at the end of the day, life's got to be about something. For me, it can't be about being alone, and I don't want it to be about any unhealthy, negative things. So I really just, maybe in this month, what I'm realizing in October is that I want to be closer to people. I want to have better relationships with the people around me and the people that I honestly love, you know? So that's that, man. That's where I am right now. That's a little question. Maybe ponder on that a little bit. Think about that for yourself, you know? See what else, man. Oh, yeah, shit. I wanted to talk about, I think I wanted to talk about some records a little bit on the podcast. This is supposed to be a little bit of a music podcast, right? So let me hop up real quick. Let me grab this record here. So I love vinyl records, man. I love having records. My parents had records when I was a kid, and we would all we had a record player that had like a cassette player and a radio built into it, and that was kind of our little entertainment center for the basement, if you would. We'd all hang out downstairs, do laundry, hang out, do whatever in the downstairs of our house, and we had a record player. And I remember my first experience with records. My mom never forgets to let me know. She was showing me her record collection when I was 3 years old, and she pulled out the soundtrack to the movie Grease. And Grease was one of my favorite movies growing up for sure. So my mom pulls out the record and she's showing it to me. And if you know anything about the Grease record, it's a double LP. It's 2 discs, two vinyl records. And she pulls out one disc, hands it to 3-year-old David Chastain, and I look at it, I'm holding it, and I just took it and just threw it across the garage like a frisbee and just shattered into a million pieces. And and I remember she never fails to let me know anytime there's records around or we're listening to records. She'll always tell that story. And then something that's a little funny later on, after I moved to Tennessee, somebody in her family, I believe it was her sister, was at a garage sale, and they found the Grease record at this garage sale, and they're going through it or whatever, and they actually found there's both discs in great condition, and there also were 2 disc 1s in the sleeve, so 3 discs. And I broke disc 1, and so my aunt bought the record, so she had the double LP, and then she took the extra disc 1, gave it to my mom, and my mom still had this second disc in her record collection from the Grease record I broke so many years ago. I guess that's been 20 years now since that happened. Man, time flies, right? So long story short, man, my mom, she was able to complete her Grease double LP many years later, just through a freak occurrence. And I think that's just funny, you know, that her sister happened to find that record. But ever since then, man, I've always loved records, going through records, looking at them, listening to them. And my favorite record probably that I've ever found was, it's a record by Ray Charles and Count Basie. The Count Basie Orchestra is called Ray Sings, Basie Swings is the name of the record. And it's actually like one of the more interesting records story-wise, right? Because the record, it's not so cut and dry, right? And I'll tell you the story of how I discovered the record. When I was a kid, I had an iPod when I got up into like the beginning of high school, and like any child of the early 2000s, we pirated a lot of music on our computers, and I would just dump all that music onto my iPod, and I had this version of Georgia on My Mind on my iPod, right? And I really loved it, and then I lost the iPod at some point, and I always would look up Georgia on My Mind to listen to it, but it was never the version that I had on my iPod. It was never the version that I was used to. And the version that I liked I thought it was way better. I thought it was totally different. And so years would go by. I mean, this is probably over a period of 10 years where I would remember the version of Georgia on My Mind. I would look it up and try to listen to it, and I'm like, oh, that's not the right one. And then I go deep into the internet searching to try to find the right one. And then one day, I was probably about 22. It was probably just a year or two ago. And I was like, fuck this, dude. I'm done. I'm going to find this. I'm going to do whatever I got to do to find it. So I started looking up alternate versions all over the place. And I found this record, Ray Sings, Basie Swings. And what it was these white Jewish gentlemen, at one point, they bought a bunch of small record labels. I can't remember what the big record label is, but they consolidated and bought a whole bunch of smaller record labels. And when they were in one of these offices, they were going through tapes, and they saw on a box of tape, it's a reel-to-reel tape, 2-inch reel-to-reel, the writing on the label said Ray Charles and the Count Basie Orchestra. And they get out, the guy freaks out. He's like, oh my God, is this what I think it is? Did they perform together? He gets it out, plays it, and what it actually was in Germany. It was like a live concert in Germany where Ray Charles was on the bill. Also, the Count Basie Orchestra was on the bill. And he listens to it, and what he found was the band tracks were absolutely horrible. If you know anything about 2-inch tape, it's 24 tracks. So it was 24 tracks. They had the band recorded, and it all just sounded like trash, muddled and horrible. You couldn't hear it really well at all. But the vocal track from Ray Charles was incredible. And not only was it like incredible quality, but he was also in his prime as a singer. As Ray Charles got older, his vocal range got a little worse and he wasn't in his vocal prime anymore. But but he also had the body of work at the time. So he had the great voice, prime Ray Charles. He also had pretty much his entire body of work released at that point. So it's just like all the hits, everything you'd want to hear from Ray Charles, and he performed it at this concert. So these guys, through one way or another, they devised this plan. They took the vocal track, and then they hired a bunch of composers and arrangers, and they went through and rewrote and composed sheet music. And the Count Basie Orchestra was on the label, although they did not play with Ray Charles. And they hired the Count Basie Orchestra many, many, many years in the future to re-record all the tracks and all the music under Ray Charles' voice and conducted by the Count Basie Orchestra. So what they end up getting is a record where it's just Ray Charles vocals from a live concert in Germany, and the rest is a band, the Count Basie Orchestra, in a studio. And I gotta tell you, man, it is one of the coolest records ever. It itself is a double LP, and the tracks, it's got a ton of covers on it. He covers The Long and Winding Road by the Beatles. Look What They've Done to My Song. That might be who is that? Dolly Parton? That might be a Dolly Parton song. I know that's definitely a country song. He does Oh What a Beautiful Morning. Starts out the record with Oh What a Beautiful Morning, Oh What a Beautiful Day. Man, it's the shit. I'm telling you, if you've never heard this record, the fucked up thing about it, you can't find it online. They don't stream it on Spotify. It's not on Apple Music. You can't buy the CDs. The CDs are all sold out, and I had to go online and buy the record in vinyl to get it. And they give you this whole packet in the album. It's like a poster, and it explains to you the entire story of how they made the record, and it is incredible. I'm a huge music studio nerd, and just to get to feel like you're living this story, this record could have never happened. This never could have happened, and it all started for me riding the bus, kids on the bus, listening to music, going to school, going home from school. It's just an incredible record, man. I love records, and this is one that I really, really love. So if you've never heard of it, you probably haven't. A lot of people probably have no idea it exists. But it's 4 sides, 2 different discs. Wonderful record. Ray sings, Basie swings. I can't recommend it enough. Go online, buy it. You can find the tracks in different YouTube videos. That's how I was listening to it until I bought the record. There was somebody compiled all the tracks in Flash players like YouTube, and you could just scroll through this webpage and play them. But I got tired of doing that. So yeah, man, that's probably my favorite record in the world. If I die tomorrow, play that at the funeral, bro. Play this Ray Sings, Basie Swings, because it's my shit, dude. What else, man? What else are we talking about here on the podcast? This is going to be a little herky-jerky. Also, you might not notice this. Maybe the quality of the podcast is better right now. It could be better or worse. I really don't know yet. But I got a little new equipment I'm working with here. I got a microphone. I'm actually I'm moving up in the world. I got a pop filter. I got a whole rig sitting in front of me right now. I'm recording right into Pro Tools. This shit's getting serious. There's a train right there. You're probably hearing that train. That's all part of the experience. That's all part of the new gear. But that's, yeah, man. Upgrading the gear, upgrading the podcast. We're getting better, man. Getting better all the time. Let's see what else I got here, man. More Sober October, yeah. Doing this Sober October thing, I feel like I've been doing pretty good lately. I feel like I've been being pretty productive. I've gone to several open mics. I think I performed stand-up 3 times this month so far. Maybe 4 times. I think I've gone up 4 times in October. I've run 24 out of 100 miles. That's my goal, to run 100 miles this month. I've gone to the gym probably 5 times. So I got all that stuff recorded somewhere. It's not written down right in front of me. But man, I feel good. But you also, it's been 10 days. I'm a third of the way through the month, and I find myself, one of my goals is to have a cleaner apartment. I want to live in a clean space. And something, if you know about me, if you know me real personal, I'm kind of messy. I'm kind of a messy dude. Especially, I live alone right now, so my apartment's a little bit of a wreck. But something I did notice is before October, I might look around and there might be some like McDonald's to-go bags and some other takeout food and stuff like that trashed throughout my apartment. But now I look around, the only mess I got a bunch of water bottles everywhere. Just water bottles littering my apartment, which is pretty good. If you're going to have some trash, get some healthy trash, you know what I'm saying? Something's going to hydrate. It's nothing too unhealthy. So something I feel pretty good about is my habits are definitely changing. I'm not sitting around. I'm not being so lazy as I normally would. I'm not being so impulsive. I'm being a little more responsible, taking care of my money better. And I'm not eating McDonald's. You wouldn't believe, some of y'all probably don't eat McDonald's all the time. I could eat McDonald's every day of my life if I had to. Like, if they came out in the press tomorrow and they said, oh man, new breaking news, McDonald's actually found not to be unhealthy for you, it was just like a myth or something like that, I'd be, oh my God, thank you, Jesus. Because I could eat McDoubles for every meal of my life. McChickens, McDoubles, McDonald's fries, big old Dr. Pepper with ice in it. I gotta quit talking about it right now because that's how much I really enjoy it. McDonald's is my shit, dude. It's a shame. It's a big shame. It's not healthier for you. If I could live in any other universe, it'd be one where McDonald's is just the same, but our human bodies, that's what we're meant to eat, is McDoubles. Because there's not only is it delicious, you can't really find a cheaper sandwich in the world than a McDonald's value menu sandwich. They just don't happen. Get a little water right here. But yeah, man, that's better. It's better to have water bottles all over the place than McDonald's trash. And it makes me feel less like McDonald's trash, like white trash. You know what I'm saying? Feel a little healthier. So what else, man? Oh yeah, I had a pretty fun. I had a unique experience this week. I was running sound for a show. If you don't know who Garfunkel and Oates are, Garfunkel and Oates, they're a comedy singing duo. They write funny songs and shit. And I can't remember how to pronounce their last name, but Kate and Ricky are their names, and they have this band, Garfunkel and Oates. They go around and do shows, and I was actually selling merch for them this weekend. And as you would imagine, the name Garfunkel and Oates comes from the more popular people in Simon and Garfunkel and Hall and Oates, right? So they took the second names, Garfunkel and Oates. That's their band name, and we were in Nashville at the show, and I'm selling merch for Garfunkel and Oates. And who walks up to the merch table but John Oates from Hall & Oates? No shit. John Oates walks up, and just to preface this, I'm selling merch. The merch I'm selling, I'm selling signed CDs from Garfunkel and Oates. I'm also selling kazoos. That's right, plastic kazoos. I'm also selling toothbrushes and buttons and stickers. So CDs, kazoos, toothbrushes, that's my items I'm selling. John Oates comes up to me, walks right up to me. He goes, hey, how much are these toothbrushes? I was like, $5. And he's like, they cash only? I was like, you bet your ass they're cash only. No, I didn't say that. But I pretty much shut down John Oates. John Oates is trying to get this toothbrush, and I think he thought he was going to get one for free, but not on my watch, bro. I'm not in charge of shit. I'm here to sell merch. But he goes, oh yeah, they're $5 a cash only? Cool. I'll be right back. And he walks back into the back, and I saw him walk right into the green room, and he came back out about 10 minutes later with a toothbrush in his mouth, with one of the Garfunkel and Oates official toothbrush hanging out his mouth. And he didn't make eye contact with me, and I felt pretty bad. Because his name's in the band, they kind of use his likeness as a part of their marketing strategy or whatever. So John Oates, if you're out there, you're probably never going to hear this, but John Oates, man, I'm sorry. I felt it the whole time. I felt like I should have just given you the toothbrush. And I love Rich Girl. I love Private Eyes. That's a great record. I've actually got that record, Private Eyes. It's one of my favorite album covers, actually, because it's just Daryl Hall and John Oates on the cover, and they just have these pink scarves covering their mouths, and noses, and then above covering their foreheads, and you just see their eyes poking out, private eyes. I don't know who in the 80s, whoever was their producer and whatever, they were all doing cocaine back then, dude. A good friend of mine said if you listen to Hall & Oates, you can hear the cocaine in the mix. Shout out to Mike Moeller. I don't think that could be any more true. But whoever let them do that album cover, covering their faces with pink scarves, somebody got to get a handle on that. Don't let that shit happen again. I know it was a long time ago, but you got to be better than that, John Oates. Maybe that's why I didn't give you the toothbrush. It's a good album, but what a silly album cover. You could do better. So that happened this week. I had a weird encounter with a celebrity, and I don't want to go too much and talk about the Sober October thing, really, man, because something I'm realizing is I've been setting a lot of unrealistic, not even unrealistic, but just kind of unfounded dietary goals. I listened to a podcast with this guy, George Lockhart, who he does a lot of stuff with fighters in mixed martial arts and boxing, mostly mixed martial arts. And he got his, dietary training pretty much through the Marine Corps and then through himself after that. And what he talks about a lot is that people just are kind of ignorant in what they do with diet. And he talked about how sugar is important, glucose, dextrose, what else did he talk about? Glycogen. How these things are like things that some people say aren't important, but having your glycogen stores up is very important. And then that goes into having glucose after workouts and things like that. And cutting out all this sugar I've done this month, I've actually had to break down. I had to buy some fruit. I started eating some fruit. I drank a Gatorade the other day. I had some cranberry grape juice, but I was feeling pretty shitty at the beginning of the month. But I've added some of the natural sugars and stuff that people that are working out all the time would do. I've added that back in my diet. Man, I feel 100% better. Like, I finally ate good for about 2 days in a row, and then last night I went to the gym and I ran 6.5 miles straight up on the treadmill without having to take a break, and I felt pretty good the entire time. And I probably could have gone a little bit more. Like, I feel pretty good today. I'm probably going to try to go to the gym tonight and run again, try to see how much I can do tonight. But diet, man, it's just not so cut and dry as you would think. You can't just dietary science is so up in the air, and they're learning new stuff all the time. That's another thing. Science is not so trusted as you would think. Science is just people. There's no institute of science that's just making the rules with the smartest people. There's just stuff people are figuring out, and we might not have all the answers. Stuff like I'm staying away from a lot of bread. I'm not eating a lot of bread, but I have found I got to find the right kind of carbohydrates. Bread and wheat, grain, stuff like that might not be the best, but you do need something. You can't just cut out. I mean, you can, but if you expect to want to work out like an insane person, like I'm trying to right now, it's really hard to do like a keto diet or a paleo diet without really knowing what you're doing, maybe hiring a dietitian, somebody that's their job, and out here freeballing it by myself. It ain't so easy. It ain't so straightforward as you might think, and I was feeling the effects. So I've kind of eased back on the such strictness of my diet, like no sugar, no bread, but I'm still no soda, still no fast food. I'm just no candy, no like stupid sugars and anything like that. But another thing that's been weird is I'm actually missing the sugar in my diet more than I am weed, which I didn't anticipate at all. Like, I thought I was like addicted to weed. I'm addicted to I don't even drink a lot of soda. I don't eat a lot of bad foods, but maybe in the last couple months I have been, and I just haven't really been paying attention because I guess maybe I have a Sprite or two at work, and then at night maybe I have like a 44-ounce soda, which is like, I can't believe that they'll sell those to people sometimes. Like, they're really not good for you. It's pretty bad. But man, if I talk about diet shit, here I am talking about I don't know shit. I'll just be talking out of my ass pretty much. But that's where I'm at right now with diet. I'm on the journey to figuring out the right thing to do for me, how to do this shit the right way, and it's fun, man. It's interesting, and I got nothing to do but live my life, and I gotta eat. Everybody gotta eat, so it's fun to try to figure out that diet stuff a little bit. Let's see what else, man. What else am I working on? Let's get into some fight stuff, because that's what I feel like I'm struggling to talk about any of this other shit, because I really just want to talk about the fights. The fights this weekend were so interesting, and I'll get to talking about the fight soon. But something that I saw announced today is John Jones is returning at UFC 232 against Alexander Gustafsson. It's going to be the second time these gentlemen are facing off. If you know anything about fighting and you saw the first fight between Gustafsson and John Jones, it was an absolute war. I don't know if I've seen a better fight in the history of the UFC. I mean, it is without a doubt one of the best contests in all mixed martial arts. I mean, everybody knows, if you do any research on it, John Jones did not train for the fight. Like, he trained for a week, and he had been doing cocaine and going out and drinking and partying, whatever. But that just shows you how good John Jones is, because he stepped in the cage against this guy, and they went at it for 5 rounds. John Jones ends up winning a decision. But, man, they beat the shit out of each other, and I am so excited to see these dudes go at it again, see John actually take the training serious this time, and see what he does to Gustafsson. Also, they announced after UFC 229, I don't know if you saw the Derek Lewis post-fight interview. Derek Lewis had a fight with Alexander Volkov. I think it's Alexander. I can't remember the dude's first name, but Volkov. Volkov, big-ass 6'4" Russian dude. He's a heavyweight. He's had 30 fights on his record, and he beat Derek Lewis's ass the entire fight. Kicked his ass the whole time. And in the last 19 seconds, Derek Lewis, throughout the last minute and a half, Derek's trying to step in. He'll throw a cross and then try to land this haymaker right hand. And that's he's one of the hardest hitters in the history of the UFC, for sure. And Alexander Volkov whipped his ass for 3 rounds. All he had to do is start backing up. He could have ran away. He could have ran off into the sunset. Just stay in the cage until the bell rings. That's all you got to do. But in the last 19 seconds of the fight, he steps in to throw an inside leg kick, and Derek Lewis just comes over the top, catches him with this haymaker right hand, gets him on the ground, and then vicious ground and pound, beat the shit out of this guy, knocks him out with less than 10 seconds left. The referee has to stop the fight. And Derek Lewis had issues with his eyes. He got a bad eye poke earlier in the contest, so he's having trouble seeing, and he was just getting smashed. And his cardio was horrible. But he wins the fight. Most epic post-fight interview probably in the history of the UFC, talking to Joe Rogan about wanting to come on his podcast and smoke weed, and he's beating the Russians for Trump or whatever. It was hilarious. I think Derek Lewis is a former NFL player. But just a couple days removed from UFC 29, here they are. They announced Derek Lewis versus Daniel Cormier at UFC 230 for the heavyweight title, which is insane because if you watch the post-fight interview, Derek Lewis says straight up, I do not want a title shot right now. I ain't ready for no title shot now, and no gas tank like that, talking about his cardio, that he's just not ready for it. And so he goes through that 3-round fight where he is just having a really hard time, and now he's 4 weeks away from having to fight again against Daniel Cormier, who is pretty much the greatest heavyweight. He might be one of the greatest heavyweights to ever fight. He's undefeated at heavyweight. Right now, he's the heavyweight champion in the UFC. He's also the light heavyweight champion in the UFC. And Derek Lewis is going to step in there and fight the best. He's going to fight Daniel Cormier just 4 weeks after going through that fight with Volkov, which is insanity. I can't believe they gave him that fight for a couple reasons, because I thought the whole plan was for Cormier, the second ever double champion behind Conor McGregor, he's going to step up to heavyweight, and now he's going to, he already stepped up because he beat Stipe for the title. And now he's going to fight Brock Lesnar, and that's a huge payday, even though Brock has been in the WWE, and Brock isn't really worth a title shot compared to the other guys in the heavyweight division. He's the biggest money fight in the UFC outside of Conor McGregor, and he might be bigger, depending, because the UFC's fan base, they're all going to buy that pay-per-view. The thing about WWE is they have pay-per-views like every 3 weeks in the WWE world. There's a new pay-per-view. They got WrestleMania, SummerSlam, Royal Rumble, just all the time, and they're $59.99 at least for the pay-per-views, and these people are buying all of them and watching all these big events. So they're definitely going to buy, all these WWE fans are going to buy the UFC card. And if you put Daniel Cormier in a fight against Derek Lewis and he gets his ass beat, no Brock Lesnar. You have no grounds to make that Brock Lesnar fight. There's no reason to do it. So he's kind of risking a huge payday against Brock Lesnar by taking this fight against Derek Lewis. Even though the whole world is kind of watching Derek Lewis right now, they really don't care about watching him fight so much. They just thought what he said was really funny, and it blew up online. So maybe they're thinking, oh, that's good marketing. I mean, Derek Lewis deserves it. Derek Lewis is the number 2 heavyweight in the world. Daniel Cormier being the number 1 heavyweight in the world, I would guess. Man, he deserves it. Derek Lewis, it's a long time coming for him. But Volkov, dude, how do you let this happen? You were in line for the title. That should have been you, dude. You went in there, you fought a good fight, and you got 30 fights on your record. You're 6'4", you're way bigger than Cormier, you're technical. I mean, it was a boring ass fight watching it. I had to watch it. I was running sound for a show. But Volkov, you had it, dude. You had it right there in the bag, and you failed. I can't believe it. But now we got Derek Lewis, Daniel Cormier. It's going to be a great fight. It's really interesting. But when you talk about Daniel Cormier, you got to talk about John Jones. What happens now? What happens for John Jones? We all want the John Jones DC trilogy. Are we going to get it? Because John Jones has beat Daniel Cormier twice in the ring, right? He's beat him twice. But on the record, both have gone to a no contest. So in the first fight, John's the champion. John fights, and then after the fight, when they get his drug test results back, he tested hot because he took those dick pills, dude, and they had the banned substance in them. And so they scrapped that one. I know I talked about this on the last podcast. Then the next fight, Cormier fought for the vacant title against Alexander Gustafsson, who John Jones went to war with. Daniel Cormier went to war with. Daniel wins the decision. He wins the title. John comes back. They fight again. John finally, he doesn't beat DC by decision. He knocks him out. He catches him hard with a head kick, left head kick, and then he chases him down and just beat the absolute dog shit out of him. And then he becomes the champ, but just for a couple days, because then he tests hot again, and now he's suspended. So now he's back off his suspension. And with Cormier taking the fight versus Derek Lewis, this is very interesting because there's a couple things that can happen, and you'll kind of be able to read the signs here in the coming weeks and figure out how it's going to go. Because what the UFC it's rumored that the UFC is asking Daniel Cormier to strip himself of the belt, just to drop the light heavyweight title, because he really doesn't have any intention publicly. He's expressed he doesn't really have any intention of fighting at light heavyweight again. What he's going to do, I guess he is going to take one fight and then hopefully win, and then he's going to fight Brock Lesnar later next year at the beginning of 2019, so maybe in March of 2019, he's going to take one more fight against Brock, and that's going to be it. He's been very public that that's his plan. But if he loses to Derek Lewis, no way is there going to be a Brock Lesnar fight, okay? So that's a huge risk. That's number one. Number two, if Daniel doesn't drop the belt, right, if Cormier doesn't strip himself of the belt so that Jones and Gustafsson can fight for it, you're kind of left to think that maybe he's going to come back and fight at light heavyweight. That being the case, if Cormier wins against Lewis or loses against Lewis and he keeps the light heavyweight belt through that time period, John fights Gustafsson on the next card. So this is the timeline. This is how it'll go. Cormier will fight Derek Lewis at UFC 230. UFC 231, we'll get into that main event that was just announced. And then UFC 232, the main event is going to be Jones versus Gustafsson. So if DC beats Lewis or loses to Lewis, he'll either retain or keep or lose the heavyweight title. Now, before that, who knows if he's going to strip the title? That's going to be the telltale sign, and I hope he does it before the 230 card. He doesn't have to. But the thing that I'm getting at, if Daniel holds on to the title and he doesn't give it up so that they can fight for it at UFC 232, that kind of makes you think that they're leaning towards the rematch, that they're going to give you the trilogy, because they need that title. Like, the UFC is going to make it very clear to him, like, dude, if you have no intention of coming back and fighting at light heavyweight, just give it up. Like, why are you going to make us wait? We need this belt to help sell the card. But if they don't give it up and Jones has to take what it would be essentially a tune-up fight, not for a belt, against Gustafsson, you might be looking at a huge fight for the future. You might be looking at Cormier having an intention to come back and fight John Jones, which I think is what the fight world needs desperately. I mean, you would talk about Khabib versus Conor. That was probably the biggest contest in UFC history so far. Jones versus Cormier 3, that shit is going to be intense. Like, there is not that's like Duke versus North Carolina. There are not people that hate each other more than Daniel Cormier and John Jones. None of that shit is fake. None of it's manufactured. They legitimately hate each other. and I would love to see him step in the ring one more time before it's all said and done. If I could live my life with anything to happen in any fight, anything, I want to see DC John Jones 3 for the title. I don't care if it's a heavyweight. I don't care if it's a light heavyweight. I just want to see it. I got to see it, and I think we need it. I think the world needs it. So who knows what's going to happen with that? It's a huge clusterfuck. They announced both those fights. They announced the Derek Lewis-Cormier fight yesterday. They announced the John Jones-Gustafsson fight today. So it's the stuff will come out. The timeline will make itself a little obvious as we move forward, especially once the fight happens at 2:30 and a little bit after. So, man, it's going to be so interesting to see what happens with John Jones, sees what happens with Cormier. And, of course, all this banks on John Jones has to beat Gustafsson, and Cormier has to keep the title because he's not going to vacate the title and then come back to light heavyweight to fight for it again. So if he gives it up, that's it. You're never going to see the fight. So, I mean, it is what it is, man. We don't live in a perfect world, and you don't always get what you want. But we got to hope that the MMA gods are going to look out for us on this one and hook us up. Let's see what else, man. What else is going on in the fight world? We got we got the original main event that we thought we were going to get for UFC 230. Nate Diaz versus Dustin Poirier. Poirier has been on the come up in the lightweight division. He looks like he's in line next for the title, or Tony Ferguson in line next for the title. But Poirier has an injury. He came up injured. It's an undisclosed injury. What's going on? So he is out at UFC 230, and it's just been a couple days, 2-3 days since they've announced that. And Diaz isn't pulling out. Diaz is going to stay on the card, so they're going to find an opponent. And you got to think, after seeing UFC 229, that Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis fight, the way Tony Ferguson looked when he came in, and man, he cut Anthony Pettis up. He did get caught early in the second round. Within the first 30 seconds, got rocked, and Pettis jumped all over him, man. But Ferguson, he recovered very well. He got up to his feet, and he cut that dude apart. I mean, he was bleeding all over the place. He was casting blood out. Like one of the announcers, his white dress shirt just had blood all over his dress shirt from Tony Ferguson cutting this dude up. And he didn't fight that long of a fight. He fought 2 rounds of a 3-round fight, and he looked great. He looked like he had all the energy in the world. Coming off a horrible leg injury. I don't know if it was his ACL or his MCL, but it was like the scar on his leg, dude. I mean, it looks like whoever did that didn't know how to perform surgery. Like, it was a brutal looking scar. And he tore his leg apart when he actually tripped. He was doing media. He was supposed to fight Khabib for the title. And he caught his leg in some cables and tripped over something, just destroyed his leg right before the fight. And that's, of course, when Holloway tried to step in. Holloway couldn't make weight, and then Ally Quinta ends up stepping in. So Ferguson looked great against Anthony Pettis. You got to think that he's going to be the guy that's going to replace Poirier, especially because he said in his post-fight interview, he's like, give me a week and I'll be ready. Give me a week. And then Poirier shows up injured. And Nate Diaz, that is maybe the 3rd or 4th biggest money fight in the UFC today as well. I mean, because he came off those Conor McGregor fights, they've got a nice saga going on, and you hope to see that trilogy too, Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. So Tony Ferguson, where are you at? What are you doing? You better start training for Nate Diaz, because I have a feeling, if I could predict the future, I have a feeling that's the fight we're going to end up seeing for the co-main event at UFC 230 is Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson. But time will tell. What else have we announced? The main event for UFC 231 has been announced. That's going to be in Canada. I think it's Toronto. I'm not exactly sure, but it's going to be the reschedule of Max Holloway versus Brian Ortega for the featherweight title of the world. And man, I know I talked about that on the last podcast, watching the UFC countdown for that fight. And I am so excited for that fight. Those two dudes are so energetic. They love to compete so much. And it's just a horrible matchup because Max Holloway is one of the most ruthless strikers in the UFC, pound for pound, anybody. I mean, he will just stand there and go to war with you. And Brian Ortega, he'll do the same thing, but he's probably got the most deadly jiu-jitsu in the entire UFC of anybody in any weight division. Like, you give that dude 1 inch of space, he's tall, he can jump up the air and just get a sink on your neck and just crank down a guillotine. I mean, that's what he does, dude. He'll just... If you expose your neck even a little bit, if you come in with your head too low and you get too close to him, he's just going to grab you around the neck and choke you to death. Ortega is such an exciting fighter to watch. A lot of UFC fans hate watching fights go to the ground, especially in part. You hear the fans boo, like from the outside of the cage, the people that got to watch through the cage. It's not so fun for them to watch, I guess, dudes fighting on the ground, but it's a huge part of the sport, and Brian Ortega, something I really want to see. We'll see what happens with this fight, Holloway and Ortega, this matchup. I don't want to break it down too much, but Brian Ortega versus Khabib, that's a fight you got to get in the future. I mean, you could not find a more stylistically fun match to make, especially because these two dudes are ground warriors. I mean, Khabib is a wrestler, Brian Ortega is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu artist, and they are both at the highest class, probably the number one guys in those styles in the entire UFC. So Brian Ortega, you probably don't know him. He's a young guy. He's on the come up. He's going to be world champion. There's a good chance he could beat Max Holloway. Good chance he could tap him out, and his striking is getting better. He knocked out Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar is one of the greats. I mean, definitely UFC Hall of Fame. He's going to be first ballot, dude. I mean, Frankie Edgar is the shit. And he knocked out Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar had never been finished his entire career. And Brian Ortega knocked him out with an uppercut. And he's a Brazilian jiu-jitsu guy. So his striking is getting incredible. His striking's getting better. And the jiu-jitsu is a nightmare to deal with. So we'll see what happens with that fight. And let's recap a little. Oh, one more. They announced Kevin Lee versus Al Iaquinta. That's a fight night contest. And that is going to be in Wisconsin coming up here soon. Al Iaquinta, if you remember, he stepped in as the replacement last minute to fight Khabib a couple pay-per-views ago when Tony and Max Holloway could not step up and do the fight. So, yeah, man, Kevin Lee, he's fought, he lost to Tony Ferguson. I think that was UFC 213, if I remember that right. Yeah, Kevin Lee, 25 years old, amazing wrestler, athlete. He just fought Edson Barbosa, I think, in his last fight, and he did really well. He got caught with a horrible wheel kick and put him on ice skates. He looked like he had the chicken legs, man. He was all over the place, rubber-legged, and he ended up recovering. I think that was in the third round that he got caught, and that might have been a 5-round contest because it probably was a main event. Kevin Lee, young guy. If there wasn't such a traffic jam at lightweight right now, Kevin Lee would be up there. He'd be fighting for the title, but he will be one day, and I would not be surprised if he's a world champion. Kevin Lee, amazing athlete. Also, he's got an incredible attitude for a successful athlete at 25 years old. Just how humble he is, how hardworking he is, and the way he portrays himself in the media. He tries to be a little bit of a badass and almost like a Conor McGregor type, but that's really not who he is, really. Hardworking, humble, athletic, and keep an eye out for that guy, Kevin Lee. I'm telling you, because in the future, how crazy is it that how many people that we talked about are 155ers right now, right? Diaz, he's a 170, Nate Diaz, but he fights at 155 sometimes. Poirier is a 155er, and I think the fight was going to be at 155 between Diaz and Poirier. Tony Ferguson, Anthony Pettis, 155ers. Kevin Lee, Al Iaquinta, they're 155ers. Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov, 155. I mean, the 155 weight division is fucking stacked, and there's nothing you can do about it right now. I mean, all those guys that are so close to the top, and style makes fights, right? It's not so cut and dry. This guy's better than this guy, so this guy will be better than this guy. Some of those guys just might be better than each other, and it's really about what matchup happens at what time for what guy is going to determine who's going to get a title shot in the next couple years, because everybody's in line right now. Everybody's got the record. Everybody's got the skills, but who's going to get it, and are they going to get the matchup that is going to help them succeed? Because honestly, Khabib is a bad matchup for everybody. The best matchups for, well, let's say the worst matchups for Khabib are probably Kevin Lee, because he's a phenomenal wrestler. Brian Ortega, who's a 145er right now, but you got to think he'll move up to 155 eventually, especially if he wins the title. So Ortega, horrible matchup for Khabib because it's jiu-jitsu. Khabib's got to be really, really smart if he gets Ortega on the ground, because it's just not going to be easy for him to do. I mean, it might be easy for him to get on the ground, and Ortega might even pull guard. He might let Khabib get on top just because he'll work off his back because he's a jiu-jitsu guy, and that's his bread and butter. He'll do that shit all day. He was a jiu-jitsu guy before he was an MMA guy. So, man, that's a fight. I'm like itching to see that fight between Ortega and Khabib. And MMA gods, if that's another one we can get along with the DC John Jones fight, I'll take it. If you put them on the same card, oh my God, I'll go to church. I promise. I'll go right now. I'll go knock on the door. I'll confess. I don't care what I gotta do. But that's I think that's all the fights pretty much that have been announced. So let's do a little recap of UFC 229 while we're here. So if you watch the fight, you gotta know what happened. Unless you're living under a rock in the past week, you probably heard about what happened. So Khabib and Conor, the fight, the hype leading up to it, all the hatred, them talking shit to each other, getting in each other's faces, people having to make sure they don't get too close to each other because they're afraid a riot's going to break out. So they go in Saturday night, and Khabib does what you think Khabib is going to do. The first 2 rounds, he takes Conor down. Second round specifically, he hammers on him. Ground and pound was vicious. I mean, the dude is a straight animal. Conor stayed really relaxed. I mean, he didn't try to expend too much energy. And Khabib unloaded on Conor in that second round. All the damage that he did to Conor was pretty much done in that second round. He caught him with the right hand that dropped him. And if you watch it, he fakes with his head. And that's what I love watching about these MMA fighters is he ducks his head for just a second for Conor, and Conor reacts because he thinks he's going to go for a takedown. So Conor starts to prepare his right leg to sprawl, and right when he does that, he opens himself up. And that happens before, as Conor's moving his leg out, Khabib's already thrown in with the right hand, and it's that fast. It's that quick in MMA. He does a little head tilt down to make Conor think he's going to shoot for a takedown, and then he comes across with a lightning fast overhand right and dropped him like a sack of potatoes, dude. Conor McGregor's never been hit like that in any fight, and to see a wrestler do it to him was insane. And he jumped all over him. He beat the fucking shit out of him in that second round. Third round, a lot of people say Conor might have got that round narrowly because Khabib was trying to get his cardio back. He expended a lot of energy in the second round, so Conor might have taken that third round. And then fourth round, Khabib comes in again, takedown success, gets him down, and Conor's trying to scoot towards the cage, and Khabib sees that, and he kind of flips around, takes his back. He sinks in a rear naked choke, and he gets it on the jaw, and he's probably about to the reason Conor tapped is because I'm of the belief that Conor probably would have gotten choked out. Like, if he had it under the chin, Conor would have went out. Like, he's not going to tap to Khabib like that. But Khabib had the choke on his chin, and he was squeezing, and he was going to crush his jaw. He's going to break Conor's jaw. So Conor has to tap. And then we all know what happens. Khabib gets up, starts going crazy. He throws his mouthpiece across the ring at Dylan Dennis. Dylan Dennis is Conor McGregor's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach who is outside the ring in the opposite corner, and then a security guard tries to kind of get in between Khabib and the fence, and then Khabib skirts him to the side and then jumps over the fence and hops into the crowd like a flying eagle. I mean, he comes in, I feel like his feet were almost above his head when he jumped into the audience. He comes down with both fists on Dylan Dennis, and then a fight breaks out. Dudes jump in the ring. They're fighting Conor McGregor. All hell breaks loose. They don't end up getting to give Khabib the belt. And the event is pretty much totally marred in that moment. You know, the honor for Khabib. Khabib is an incredibly respectful and honorable fighter. Always has been his entire career. He's undefeated now. He's 27-0. He legit is the champ now because he beat the champ. He beat Conor. You know, Conor's the first champ in history. 145, 155. Conor's the biggest MMA figure in the world. He beat him handily. I mean, he had nothing left to prove, and he jumps over and does that stuff. And I gotta tell you, I'm not mad at him because I turned on the fight, and there were a bunch of people there, and I'm telling them about the main event, and everybody knows who Conor McGregor is. Nobody knows who Khabib Nurmagomedov is. We're sitting down, the fight is happening. Nobody knows who Khabib is. You think anybody doesn't know who Khabib is now? They don't think he's a badass? You don't think, excuse me, you think people don't think Khabib can compete now? You don't think people aren't going to remember his name? In a way, I think we're going to look back on this with a little fondness in sports history for the fact that it went down the way it did. Because a lot of people, there's a double standard in MMA, especially not in MMA, but there's a double standard when it comes to Conor McGregor versus everybody else. And Conor McGregor, if you don't remember this, a couple months ago, the reason this matchup happened is because Conor McGregor, I think it was at the Barclays Center, Khabib is supposed to fight Al Iaquinta, and it's the day of the fight, and they're on the bus, and Conor McGregor runs in with 40 dudes into the Barclays Center and then throws a dolly through the bus window that Khabib is on. And people forgive that. They're still Conor McGregor fans. They think he's an honorable guy. Conor McGregor, in another fight, when he was in title contention at 145, I forget who the person was that he beat, but he beats the guy, knocks him out, and then he runs, jumps over the cage, and then ringside, Jose Aldo, who was at the time the 145-pound champion, is sitting ringside, and Conor is getting all in his face and screaming at him and looking like he's trying to fight him because he wants the title shot. Nobody says anything about that. They think it's badass, But Khabib, he jumps out of the ring by himself after beating Conor to go after pretty much Conor's entire team, and people start calling Khabib a coward and saying he's dishonorable or whatever. The one thing you can't condone is his teammates and cornermen jumping in the ring and going after Conor, who had just gone through a really tough 4-round fight, and he lost. And there's no excuse to go in the ring and assault another fighter. There's no excuse. Now, Khabib make a decision to jump and run out and fight the whole crowd in Las Vegas. That's one thing. He can do that, I guess. He's going to face a huge fine and maybe a big suspension. I don't think he's going to get stripped of his belt because something I'm glad I saw today, Dana White tweeted out. It's a meme. There's a bear opening a side door of a house, like on a patio, and is... says, Ms. Nurmagomedov, can Khabib please come out to play? And he tags Khabib. So Dana's obviously not mad at Khabib. He wants to see him fight again. Now, this is in the hands of the Nevada State Athletic Commission at this point. Khabib can't necessarily depend on Dana White or the UFC to get him out of this just because they want him for marketing now, because Khabib is a hot commodity. The whole world was watching. The whole world paid attention, and it's one of the biggest moments in fighting since the Tyson Holyfield riot, where that spilled into the audience, and then the whole arena starts fighting, and it spills out into the casino fights and riots and people out onto the street. It's a huge moment in sports, whether you like it or not, if it's negative or positive. So Khabib is a money-making dude right now. He can get them a huge draw for pay-per-view. People are going to pay to watch him fight, and he doesn't have to fight Conor anymore to do it. Now, is the rematch for Conor McGregor going to be the best deal? Probably so. But that doesn't mean... Conor just got his ass stomped in 4 rounds. He didn't show really any good promise. Khabib totally outclassed him. So I don't think Conor necessarily deserves it. Does him not deserving it mean he's not going to get it? Probably not. I would imagine the UFC is going to make this fight immediately. The one thing I'm worried about is Conor McGregor isn't going to be good enough to beat Khabib if he fights him next. He's just not going to do it. He doesn't have the sharpness in the ring. Like when you watched him, he seemed a little timid. He was flat on his feet. He loaded up his left hand. If you know anything about Conor McGregor, he's got a deadly left hand, and he was just kind of loaded up on the left hand, telegraphing that he was trying to throw it the entire time. So Khabib really didn't get hit with it at all. So I think the best thing for Conor McGregor, and he's Mr. Millionaire right now. He's the $100 million man after fighting Floyd Mayweather. So he's not going to want to take a tune-up fight against anybody. He's not going to want to take a fight that's not for a belt against anybody. He doesn't want to do that. But would it be in his best interest? Absolutely. 100% it would be in his best interest. I think somebody I'd like to see him fight is Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis just coming off a loss. I think Tony Ferguson is the greatest matchup for Khabib right now. Tony Ferguson deserves it. He was the interim champion. And he got injured. Khabib was going to fight him for the interim championship. And when Tony got injured, they stripped him of his interim belt. At the same time, they also stripped Conor of his real 155 belt, and they vacated it and put it on the line for the real fight. So before Tony Ferguson got injured, Khabib was challenging Ferguson for his interim title. And Tony tears his ACL, is out of the fight, and now Khabib picks up the real championship. And Tony doesn't even get to hold on to his interim belt. They stripped him of it. So, it's a tough go for Tony, and man, he looks so good against Anthony Pettis. He is a stylistic nightmare. Like, other than him and Ortega, those are the two that you want to see. Him, Ortega, Kevin Lee, those are the guys you want to see fighting Khabib in the next future if Khabib was taking any more fights. Kevin Lee is a little bit down the line, so I mean, you have your choices right there. You have your choices to pick from. You got Ferguson, and you got that's your immediate choice, I think. He's probably gonna step up and fight Nate Diaz. If he loses to Nate Diaz, that's probably gonna change something. So if you hear me saying that and then they announce a Tony Ferguson-Nate Diaz fight, I'm goddamn predicting the future in here. You know what I'm saying? But it only makes sense. It only makes sense that that's the fight. But for Khabib, man, what's next? What's he going to do? He goes back home to Russia. I saw he met with Vladimir Putin today. Hopefully he doesn't get anything too strict come down on him because, man, he got emotional. You forget Conor was talking about his country. He was making fun of his country. He was talking about his religion. Khabib is an extremely religious. I think he's like Russian Orthodox Muslim. So, I mean, he's all into Allah and all that shit, dude. Like, I mean, he won't fight during Ramadan. The dude is a real fighter. He still lives at home with both parents and his wife and his 3 kids. And his parents don't live with him. He lives with his parents, like in the childhood home. Like, they didn't buy a new house. And they're fucking loaded rich. So, what do you do with a guy like that? That's obviously a guy that just wants to fight and he just wants to be the fucking man. So, Conor, if you step in and just fight him again, I say that like I'm talking right to Conor McGregor, like he would give a fuck what I say. But if Conor just steps right in and fights Khabib again, right, I mean, he's not going to win. He doesn't have a chance. He's got to give himself a chance. Of course, he's a fighter, and he's Conor McGregor, and he's got to think that he can do better and be better and win the fight. But I just don't see it happening, especially after seeing what I saw on Saturday night. He needs a tune-up, and somebody like Anthony Pettis would be perfect for him because he likes to go out. He likes to put a lot of energy into something. He's a striker. It'll be a very dynamic striking fight, and Conor has the advantage there. And that'll be big money no matter what. Conor doesn't have to worry about titles. Conor doesn't have to worry about belts. He got to worry about money. And regardless, he's still going to make more than Khabib on this fight anyway, even though he lost. Because in the contract, Conor's guaranteed $3 million, and Khabib is guaranteed $2 million. And then once the pay-per-view numbers roll in, they're going to get percentages based off the pay-per-view because they're on the main event and their names are going to be the ones selling the card. So it's in their contract that they get money based on the pay-per-view numbers. And that $2 million and $3 million is going to be chump change versus how much money they made on the pay-per-views. So, I mean, they don't really got to worry about money. And if Conor really does care about the love of the game, I personally think he's got to take a different fight. Because if he loses again, that's it, dude. What are you going to do? You can't be a guy that's just losing all the time like that. And Conor McGregor now has lost the 3 most important fights of his career. He lost against Nate Diaz in the first fight. He lost against Floyd Mayweather. And now he's lost against Khabib. Those are the 3 biggest fights. So he can't just be so foolish coming in after a 2-year layoff and take this fight. And then just the very next fight, he's going to come in and fight a better version of Khabib. And Khabib always gets better. Always gets better. So, I mean, I think he's got to be realistic. I think he's got to do what everyone thinks he should do and take a different fight. Because, I mean, fuck. If you're not a real MMA fan, like I heard Stephen A. Smith yelling over Max Kellerman. If you don't know who they are, Max Kellerman is a commentator for HBO Boxing and has been for forever. And Stephen A. Smith is retarded. So, hearing Stephen A. Smith scream over Max Kellerman about how he's wrong, about Conor doesn't deserve a rematch, and how, no, this is what happened, and this looked good. Dude, fuck you, Stephen A. Smith. Shut up when it comes to fighting. Just talk about the Philadelphia 76ers. Go back to talking about Allen Iverson. That's all you're good for, dude. You're becoming a caricature of yourself as a sportscaster. And if that ever gets to Stephen A., I don't give a shit, dude. I really don't care for him or Skip Bayless. I'm glad they took him off. Then took Skip Bayless off First Take and put him on Fox Sports, because hearing those two debate each other was like fucking I don't even know, nails on a chalkboard meets like air horns versus like stabbing myself in the eyes with pencils and pulling out my eardrums with my own fingernails. Like, that is Stephen A. Smith and Skip Bayless talking to each other in a nutshell. So Stephen A. Smith, man, shut up when it comes to fights, because nobody gives a fuck, and you admit, you'll say that you don't know what's going on, and then you will boisterously interrupt and tell him your opinion and how you're right. So fuck you, Stephen A. And if you're out there saying that Conor just straight up deserves a rematch and you think so, you're just dead wrong. I don't want to see it. I don't think a lot of people want to see it. You want to see McGregor fight anyway. And he just signed a 5-fight contract with the UFC, and this was fight number 1. So he still owes him 4 fights. So, I mean, you're going to see him fight for titles. You're going to get the Nate Diaz trilogy. Why not get some other stuff? Because he's obviously not going to knock off Khabib with any amount of ease and then be the champ, and then you're going to get a bunch of title fights out of him at lightweight. So set him up for success, don't throw him to the wolves. These dudes are good wrestlers, and he's had a lot of time off. There's a lot of dudes in the 155-pound weight division, and if Conor loses another fight to a guy that's not a title holder, he's done in the title picture because there's so many dudes at 155. I mean, the only thing I would say that would be good for that is if Conor is no longer reasonably eligible for that title at 155, you will see the UFC create the 165-pound weight division. I promise you. Because they want Conor fighting for belts. They want Conor fighting in the UFC, and he wants to fight for belts. So I really hope I see that 165-pound weight division. I talked about that on the last one. I might have talked about it like it was going to happen for sure. But it actually, what I came to find out was Nate Diaz and Dustin Poirier just kind of took it upon themselves to say that it was happening, and it actually wasn't happening. They were just trying to force the UFC's hand in creating that fight for them, and it really wasn't legit. So they really weren't fighting at 165. The bout is at 155. Now that Poirier's out, I'm sure that it'll still be at 155. But you got to think that if Conor loses anymore, they will create that new weight division, especially because he's been talking so much about wanting to create new weight classes. So, man, I mean, that's pretty much UFC 229 in a nutshell. Khabib went off and tried to fight the whole audience pretty much, and then he didn't get his belt, and now he's going to get a huge suspension and definitely a huge fine. Hopefully they don't strip him of his title. The only thing that would make any sense is if they give him a long suspension, like a year, 18 months, that they might have to strip him because there's so many people at 155 worthy of a title. And then now as soon as he comes off his suspension, he'll definitely be the next guy in line for a title shot. And then who knows, maybe that plays into the timeline for the Conor rematch better. Like, say Khabib's out for 18 months, and then Conor has a chance to take a different fight. He tunes up a little bit. Maybe Conor fights 2 more times before he has to fight Khabib again. That wouldn't be a bad move. I don't think that'd be a bad move by any chance. But, I mean, you think about it, the roadblock at 155, if Nate Diaz beats like Tony Ferguson or whoever at 155, man, they got to give that dude a title shot. They do. And they can't do that. They can't make the Conor McGregor trilogy with Nate Diaz if he wins this fight and then is in line for the title shot. I mean, it's great because there's so many great fights right now, but it's going to be so hard to create the title picture and to get the contenders correctly. So it's going to be really strange. It's going to be really strange in the UFC moving forward in these next couple months. We have some banger pay-per-views. 230, the main event with Derek Lewis and Daniel Cormier. 231 in Canada with Max Holloway and Brian Ortega. And then now you've got UFC 232 announced with John Jones and Gustafsson 2. Going to be insane fight cards coming up. I know this fight card for 230 beyond the Derek Lewis fight and the Nate Diaz fight. I mean, it is just a stacked card all the way through the preliminary contest. It is a stacked card. I think Israel Adesanya, Stylebender, is going to be fighting on that card. And I can't remember who he's fighting right now, but Stylebender, he's a welterweight. I believe he's a welterweight. He either fights at 170 or 185. So he's either a welterweight or a middleweight. But the dude is one of the most entertaining fighters stylistically to watch right now in the UFC. So Stylebender's on that card. I'm not sure who else all is on there, but man, it's going to be a great fight. I can't wait to see UFC 230. But yeah, man, maybe we'll wrap it up there. We did a little bit over an hour this time. I feel a little herky-jerky. I wanted to talk about that fight stuff so much. I don't think I covered a lot of great content. But another podcast in the books, baby. Please, again, go to YouTube and subscribe live from the Tracking Room. That's the YouTube channel. I'm on Instagram at LFTTR_. Also, David Chastain _ is the personal Instagram. But make sure you follow the podcast Instagram. And keep coming back, guys. Keep listening. Keep supporting. I love it. Thank you guys so much. And I'm out.